Hey guys, welcome back to Mystifying Miracles. I'm Kristen. Twice a week, I do true stories. I talk about them. Sometimes they're mysterious, sometimes they're little bitty, sometimes they're longer stories. And the thing to them is they always have at least one miracle. So, if that sounds interesting, follow along and we are going to get started. Our story today takes place in the 1970s. It was a beautiful autumn day, and a little girl by the name of Anne Tichenor, she's 12 years old, and she was outside riding bikes with all of her little friends. Well, as they were out playing that day, some other little boys their age started throwing crab apples at them as they were riding by. Just in good fun, not to be mean or anything like that. And when Anne got home that afternoon, she was telling her mother, Cynthia, all about their day. And she was like, "Mom, there were some boys throwing crab apples at us." Cynthia kind of looked at it and there was nothing there. And Anne wasn't upset about it. She was just, like I said, explaining her day and telling her mom what went on. And her mom just chalked it up to, "Oh, that just must be how kids flirt these days." A few hours later, Cynthia gets on the phone. She's just chatting with a friend. All of a sudden, she hears this, "Mom, Mom," like kind of screaming at the top of her lungs. So, of course, that kind of startles Mom here. So she goes to check out, see what was wrong with Anne. Well, Anne was screaming about her eye, where one of those crab apples had hit that the little boys were throwing. And she was crying and kind of complaining to Cynthia that it hurt really bad. All of a sudden came on like a sharp pain, and it was very intense. So, of course, Cynthia, worried, and she couldn't see anything outwardly, but it hurt Anne so much, she said, all right. She called the ophthalmologist and got Anne in for an appointment. So after the doctor looks at her, he tells Mom, "Look, this is not good news. This is very bad." And he goes on to explain that behind the eye where the crabapple hit, there was hemorrhaging taking place. And so Cynthia, was like, "Oh my goodness." And the condition itself, the doctor said, is called traumatic hyphema. It can actually cause permanent vision loss. So he told Mom, "Look, here's the treatment." And again, you got to remember, this was the 70s. I'm not sure what the treatment would be these days. But back in the 70s, it was to put a patch over both eyeballs and to have Anne lie down for up to 5 days with head of the bed tilted just ever so slightly. And he said that this was so that as healing was hopefully occurring, that, if you can't be jostled around and whatnot, because there could be fresh hemorrhaging that would take place. And you don't want that, he said, when there are blood clots actually behind the eye. So he patched her up. He put 2 patches over each eye, and he helped Cynthia get Anne in very gently into the car because she was going to have to take her to the emergency room for follow-up, further care, and to make sure, they're following all the requirements, laying down for 5 days, all that good stuff. So on the way there, of course, Mom's worried. She's, scared about what's going to happen. She's also driving carefully, like going 10 miles an hour because she didn't want to hit a bump or, have a car crash that could be detrimental to Anne. They pull up to the ER. They finally get there. And the staff helps get, Anne all settled into a room and a bed. By then, it was, early evening. And Mom, Cynthia, she had to get back home because she had other kids to tend to. She couldn't just stay at the hospital with Anne. So she kissed her goodnight, said, do what the doctors and the nurses tell you, and she got back into her car to head home. Once in her car, she finally just had that emotional release where she just started bawling and crying. She was so scared, for Anne, because not only could, there'd be damage to her vision permanently, But you never know with blood clots back there. I mean, I'm assuming you don't want those traveling further to other places in the body, causing more issues, I would think. The doctor didn't technically say that in the story, but I would think, in my opinion. And then also, while they were at the hospital, I forgot to add this in, minor part of the story, but Cynthia did call her husband. He was actually out of the country on a business trip. He didn't answer, so she wasn't able to tell him what happened, but that did occur. And then, of course, Cynthia went home to be with her other children. Now, when she got up the next morning, she decided to call a couple of her friends from, their local Methodist church. And she wanted to just ask for prayers for Anne and, of course, herself, because she was kind of a stress ball, a mess. I mean, I would be too if that was my child. She tells them again, could you spread the word to some other people throughout the church? That way they can kind of pray and get a little prayer chain going. So, of course, they told, Cynthia, yes, we will do that. Well, one of the women that Cynthia called, her name was Norma, and her husband, Jim, had been standing there by the phone when she got the call from Cynthia. So, of course, Norma proceeds to explain to Jim all about the incident and what happened to Anne. Jim was about to leave for work, so he heads out the door, and on the way there, he can't get out of his mind what happened. And poor little Anne, he knew her, he knew the family well because they all went to church together. He just couldn't stop thinking about it. Now, he was a believer in Jesus, but the story said he had never really prayed for anything specific, especially healing. So he wasn't even quite sure how to begin. He was just kind of thinking, gosh, I really want to pray, but how do I do this? Is kind of how he was thinking about it. Well, he went throughout his day, his work day, and he gets in his car to head back home. This is where, of course, it was still on his mind. He wanted to be able to help out any way he could, and the only way he knew to was to pray. So he kind of did. He started to talk. And here's what the story said. It was pretty short. He said, Jesus, Anne doesn't need this problem. Please take care of it right away. And that was pretty much the end of the prayer. And right as he was ending that prayer, he was coming upon a stop sign. So he starts to slow down. And then the next thing is like very interesting, what happened. His testimony, he said, he pulled up to the stop sign, and then all of a sudden it was like a curtain came down in front of the windshield. I kind of envisioned the curtain, like if you're watching a play and it comes down, sort of like that. And he said the windshield itself almost looked like a widescreen TV. And so as he's coming to a stop, he's seeing that, the curtain, and then it's like a TV. And then he says he began to see a scene of a hospital room and someone was in a bed. That someone, of course, was Anne. He said her eyes were bandaged, both of them, and someone was sitting next to her head. And he said whoever it was next to the head of her bed, you could only see him from the chest down. And he said he was glowing. Ooh, I got chills when I just said that. He said it couldn't have been a doctor because whoever this glowing man was from the chest down was dressed in a white robe. Jim continued to look on, and he said he saw the man take his hand and cup very gently over Anne's left eye, the injured eye. And he instantly knew that what that man was doing was a healing gesture. And he says that at that same time, he knew that his prayer had been answered right before his eyes. And then he said the scene of it just gradually faded away. And then the red stop sign came back into view. Like it was almost as if he was watching a movie, but he wasn't. He knew that was Anne, and he knew that she was getting healed. So once he got home, Jim called Cynthia up. He asked Cynthia if Anne's, both of her eyes, are they bandaged? And she replied, well, yes, but how did you know that? Jim then asked her which eye was injured, to which Cynthia replied, well, it was the left one. Well, Jim ended up getting off the phone shortly thereafter, and he said he just had to think this over. This was just wow, this was a lot. And he said, he just had to mull over it for a while, and he couldn't talk about it until he did so. Well, fast forward 5 days passed, and Cynthia's taking Anne back to the doctor so that they can take off the bandages from her eyes. And the ophthalmologist, he's doing his checks, all that good stuff. And it also said, that before they got there on the way to the ophthalmologist, Cynthia just had this very calming peace over her. And she attributes that to because the night before, Jim had called her up and he had actually told her what he saw. He didn't tell anybody else after that, but he did tell Cynthia. So she just had a peace about it after hearing that. Well, Cynthia's in the waiting room. She's, waiting for the doctor to finish up. And then, time passes and she's like, gosh, he sure is in there talking a long time or checking Anne. I wonder why it's taking so long. So then anxiety starts to set in because she's thinking, this should be easy and quick. Well, finally, the ophthalmologist opens the door and he comes out to the waiting room and he says to Cynthia, this is wonderful. He said to Cynthia that he was sure that when he did all his tests that Anne would have lost at least 30% of her vision, in his expertise and what he's seen in the past. But after performing all his tests, he said both eyes were completely normal. He said in perfect condition. And he even said, it looks as if nothing had ever injured her in the first place. So this ophthalmologist was just baffled by this. And pretty much that's the end of the story. It did say that, everyone, involved within that story did know that God came. He showed up big time and he did something supernatural for Anne. He healed her eyes. Not one iota, not one little bit of damage done. Just amazing. And another great healing miracle in the books. Love it. Let me know what you guys thought of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did and you like these kind of things, these stories being told, make sure you hit the like button and also subscribe. And other than that, guys, I will see you for the next one. Thank you so much for watching.